The second I picked up the name card, my stomach dropped like I'd been pushed. It was thick, expensive stock, the kind you only see at fundraisers and fancy galas. My name was written in pretty calligraphy, but beneath it, in a different hand and a meaner pen, someone had scrawled, "Marcus, father by obligation." That line hit harder than I expected. 19 years. I raised Riley alone after her mother left when she was 5 months old. Diapers at midnight, shifts that bled into overtime, school runs, scraped knees, fever nights. I was the one who showed up. Always. And now I was sitting on a linen-covered chair at a Lake Tahoe venue, surrounded by strangers in suits who looked like they belonged in a yacht brochure. My truck, the one I drove, would have been an embarrassment in that room. Quick note before you listen. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. Back to it. The table was a study in polished hands and quiet judgments. Someone's aunt glanced down at my shoes and snickered to her husband. A tech bro smirked when he saw me staring at the card. 2 seats over, a young guy snorted loud enough for me to hear. Guess they really had to include the janitor. He didn't know I could hear him. I didn't start anything. I just pushed my chair back slowly. No riot. No spectacle. I didn't want to be the show. Riley looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Silk white dress, hair in soft waves, that smile that bites a little and heals too. She was laughing with her in-laws, toasting without a care. Maybe everything in that room, their memories, their status, their assumptions, were fine. Maybe I didn't belong there anymore. Maybe their chapter had ended and I just hadn't closed the book. I turned to leave, not even bothering with goodbyes. I didn't want to cry in front of them or hand them my dignity on a silver platter. That's when the music cut. The mic crackled. Conversation evaporated, like someone flipped a switch. Riley was in the middle of the dance floor, heels off, hair falling, clutching her fiancé's hand like she'd had enough of pretending. "I'm done," she said into the mic. No trembling, no need for drama. The room laughed, thinking it a joke. She let go, walked straight toward me. The DJ froze. Brent, the groom, stood there like someone who'd been interrupted mid-dream. Riley grabbed my arm. "Let's go," she said. We walked out. No spectacle, just her dress picking up confetti and sticky champagne on the soles. Nobody stopped her. Nobody even tried. We drove in silence for 40 minutes. The car smelled like makeup and hope. Her dress swished with every turn. When she finally exhaled, she told me she'd seen the card first, at the rehearsal dinner. She'd watched them all, waiting. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Watch," she said, and hit play. The video was clear as day. Alan Drexler, the groom's father, tie loosened, scotch in hand at the bar, joking with the room. Can't wait to see her face when she finds out she could have had her real dad walk her down the aisle. You know, the one who didn't mop floors for a living. Brent laughed in the background. The clip cut, but my chest didn't. He knew. They all knew. And they'd smiled at us afterward. Her real dad, I muttered. That bastard left before she even had teeth. Riley looked at me calm, deadpan. I told them who raised me. They didn't care. I asked why she hadn't stopped it sooner. She said she needed proof. Evidence to watch people be themselves when they thought they were safe. She needed to see. Then she handed me an envelope. Inside, notarized filings, timestamps, legal paperwork, all under her name. Never signed the prenup, she told me. Had my team counter it. They ignored it. She wasn't naive. She'd been working. Since February, she'd had a lawyer. Family counsel, confidential. I blinked. How long? Long enough, she said. She showed me a homepage on her phone. Artera Biotech. Predictive diagnostics. Series C. Valuation around 80 million. I sat there like someone whose daughter had been quietly building a rocket in the backyard and never told him. She shrugged. Didn't want to jinx it. Didn't want people to think I got here because of them. She reached into another folder. Stock certificates, purchase records, holding company trails traced through Nevada and Delaware. Winter Light Holdings, the first name on the stack. I didn't just buy shares, she said. I bought control. 37% as of last week. I traced my finger over the clean, sterile ink. Layers of companies, dividend flow from Artera, a bit of inheritance from Grandma, all funneled into acquiring a stake in Drexler Medical Logistics. Riley laid out spreadsheets like a general exposing an enemy's supply chain. Inventory discrepancies that were 3 times worse than reported. A vendor, General Sink Supplies, overcharging Drexler by 15%. Ownership tied back to Brent's uncle. Falsified FDA filings. She'd audited them independently. They were sloppy, reckless, corrupt. "If this goes public," she said quietly, "they're radioactive." She produced 3 proxy agreements, small votes that, combined with minority shareholders, gave her leverage. Ellen Carter, an independent board director, had agreed to back her if she could reach quorum. The plan was in motion, and then she did something I didn't expect. She slid a 1-page proxy transfer across the table and said, "I'm transferring my vote to you. You want me to hold the voting rights?" I asked. "Public optics," she said. "They can't call this a daughter's temper tantrum if you're the one calling the vote. You'll be the man they underestimated. The janitor they laughed at will be calling the shots." My hands were shaking when I picked up the pen, not from fear, from something raw and old, pride braided with a kind of righteous anger. "You sure?" I asked. "Never been more sure," she said. I signed. "Meeting's Thursday," she told me. "Be ready. Wear a real suit this time." The suit she handed me 3 days later felt like armor and felt alien. Dark charcoal, tailored, the kind of clothing I'd only ever seen folded in storefront windows. I fastened the buttons like someone dressing for a role I'd been rehearsing my whole life for without knowing it. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the guy who changed shirts in gas station bathrooms between shifts. I saw someone they hadn't planned for, someone they'd underestimated. We walked into Drexler Medical's headquarters at 9:04 a.m., 4 minutes after the meeting had started. Riley pushed open the frosted glass doors like she belonged to the building. 12 faces turned, all of them smug and unprepared. Alan Drexler stood at the head of the long table in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He barked that we weren't allowed in. Riley laid a stamped document on the table, filed Monday, verified by the corporate secretary. My name was bold at the top. Legal transfer of proxy authority. Silence. One of the board members, that silver-necklaced woman from earlier, flipped to the stamp and said, "It's valid, Alan." He tried to scoff it off, but the papers sat there like proof. Riley walked the room through the files like a prosecutor. Vendor fraud tied to Gen Sync. Overbilling by $1.3 million across 4 quarters. Misstated inventory. Falsified FDA paperwork to secure a warehouse expansion. Pages slid across the table. Faces drained. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ." Alan laughed once, brittle and small. "You think you can just walk in here and stage a coup?" he said. Riley's voice didn't rise. "I don't think." "I know." She called an emergency vote. Audit. Compliance breach. Financial misconduct. 3 proxies were confirmed. Ellen Carter, Joseph Nunez, Kimberly Rice. Together with Riley's stake, we had quorum and control. When the votes were tallied, the motion to remove Alan Drexler, Walter Drexler, and Brent Drexler from executive authority passed. Then Ellen named me interim board chair. My mouth went dry. Riley gave me a look. Part command, part sisterly satisfaction. I stood. The room tilted an octave, and 8 hands rose. Motion carried. Alan stormed out. Brent sat frozen, looking like someone who'd been told the world he'd been raised to run had been taken away. Riley looked him in the eye and said, "This was never about love. It was about legacy." Then we left. No cheering, no trumpets. Just the steady click of our shoes against expensive tile and a door swinging shut. Outside in the lobby, Riley let her shoulders drop for the first time. She grinned at me. "Nice suit. Nice takedown," she said. We climbed into the car and drove off like this was a Tuesday. I kept thinking. 3 weeks ago, I had grease under my nails. Today, I chaired a meeting at a multi-million-dollar company. A week later, Brent showed up on my porch, tie crooked, eyes hollow, looking like the kind of man whose world had lost its gravity. He begged to talk to Riley. I stood in the doorway like a gatekeeper. Riley walked out barefoot, in a hoodie, hair pulled back, no pretense. Brent tried to explain, to apologize in that way men do when they're trying to reframe their own cowardice. "You laughed," she said calmly. "You stood there and laughed while your mom called me the janitor's daughter and your dad called mine a handyman. You could have stopped it. You didn't." He handed over a wrinkled sheet of paper. A desperate plea. She handed him back a crisp envelope. A cease and desist. Not revenge. Protection. Structural boundaries. He left with his hands empty and the envelope limp at his side. And for the first time, the wreckage he helped build had to stand on its own. We used the dividends from Q2 to seed a non-profit arm, Carter Health Access Fund. Under a rented pop-up tent at Oak Ridge Park, 3 blocks from our old duplex, we stacked glucose monitors, blood pressure cuffs, health tablets loaded with literacy software. The neighborhood showed up. Riley stood at the mic in rolled sleeves and no blazer. She didn't need theatrics. "This is about closing gaps," she said. "Not headlines, not handouts." When I spoke, the mic felt foreign in my calloused hands. I didn't know corporate speak. I knew showing up, fixing what's broken, being reliable. People clapped real, grateful applause. Teens came up afterwards, eyes wide. One kid with a hoodie that said future engineer told me he'd never seen anyone like me at a board table. He wanted a photo with the man with grease under his nails turned interim chair. I obliged. A week later, Riley handed me a small white envelope. Inside, a key and a deed. A 3-bedroom house on a corner lot. Not repayment, she said, just an upgrade for both of us. We sat on the folding chairs under the tent, wind in the maples, and let it sink in. No speeches, no fanfare. Just two people who'd built something and were finally allowed to breathe. Months later, she was on a stage at UC Davis giving a keynote called Strategic Patience, Winning by Watching. Business students scribbled notes like the floor was lava. During Q&A, someone asked who'd influenced her the most. She didn't hesitate. "I learned business from a man who never went to college," she said, and pointed to me. The room clapped. I sat still, not waving, not smiling, just letting the moment be what it was. Walking back past the valet, that same kid who'd snickered at my old truck didn't recognize me. He tipped his hat and said, "Nice ride, sir." I slipped him a 5. It felt good in a small, clean way. The change wasn't about revenge. It was about flipping a system that treated people like props. We moved Drexler into a public equity trust with clauses for healthcare access, transparency, and compliance. The majority stake was held by the nonprofit wing, locking out personal profiteering. When the e-signature blinked green, it felt like reclamation, not theft. A year later, we were under a different banner. Carter Health Equity Fund, plain navy billboard over a gas station, read, "Integrity is inherited." Riley's plan had never been theft. It was restoration. The people who'd laughed had been unmasked. The people who'd been overlooked were finally seen. So here's the last thing. Tell me, would you have forgiven Brent if you were in Riley's shoes? Drop your answer in the comments.